Welcome to Out of the Blank.
Welcome to another episode of Out of the Blank podcast. Scott, can you please introduce yourself to everyone out there listening?
Yep, thanks, Robbie. Thanks for the invitation. Just introduce myself. I'm Scott Reid. I am from Glasgow in Scotland, and I've been interested in the Kennedy assassination for the best part of 40 years. The first memory I've got, first interest I had was in my early teens, maybe. I remember a drama. It wasn't a documentary, it was a drama. It was called The Trial of Lee Harvey Oswald, and it was on the TV over here, and I was a young kid, but it seemed to just get my interest. I can't even really say why, maybe just the mystery, the violence of the whole assassination just really got my interest. The first book I read was Conspiracy by Anthony Summers, and that really that was the launch pad really for me. I remember in the 1988 we had the Men Who Killed Kennedy series, and that caused quite a big splash in the UK with the two episodes that were shown over here, and there was quite a bit of controversy around that. So that just led into a lot more reading. Visited Dallas for the first time in 1996. That was a two-day trip, and I never really thought I would ever go back. But in 2013, I went back for the 50th anniversary, and I've been back really every year since. Apart from 2020, 2021 when we had COVID, but I did go back last year. So I've had a chance to visit all the sites, the sixth floor, the Texas Theatre, Parkland, the Dallas Police Headquarters. And really in recent years, I thought in some of the books that I read, I started reading about some kind of little bit of a Scottish connection. Particularly a guy that really got my interest called William Duff, who lived there or who was born not that far from where I stay. So I started to say, well, rather than just reading all the books and going to the conferences, let's do a little bit of research of my own. So that's where I started to get involved in looking at the kind of William Duff story that maybe we'll touch on. And it just took me on from there. So I've got a real interest, any book I've read, I think the last 10 years has all been about the Kennedy assassination.
I feel you on that. And only for me, it's been a couple of months. But who's William Duff? You want to explain a little bit about William Duff and his connection?
Sure. So William Duff was born in 1931 in a town called Grangemouth, which isn't too far from, as I said earlier, from where I'm actually at just now. Now, William Duff basically in 1957, William Duff moved to America, and he first of all arrived in New York, and then he moved to California. He enlisted in the US Air Force in December 1957, and he had quite a troubled couple of years in the US Air Force. He had a court-martial conviction, and he basically received an undesirable discharge in December 1959. But the way Duff really gets involved in the Kennedy assassination, if you like, is in late 1962. He is on a bus coming down he says he boarded the bus in Seattle, and there was a lady called Frances Bernard, and she was from Texas, and she met Duff. She boarded the bus in Vancouver, and Duff got on the bus in Seattle, and they basically got chatting to each other. And I think Duff must have had, we call it over here, the gift of the gab. I think he was able to kind of charm this lady. and they must have had a good chat on the way down to Los Angeles on the Greyhound bus. Now, when they got to Los Angeles, she carried on to Dallas, and Duff followed her a few weeks later, and they actually got married on the 5th of November 1962. So they hadn't known each other that long, only a matter of weeks, but they were married. However, uh, Francis Bernard basically found out that William Duff basically told a lot of lies. He wasn't somebody to be trusted. He borrowed money off her to buy a car. He said he was waiting on a paycheck from Boeing, and which wasn't, none of that was true. So when basically she found out a little bit more about her husband, she basically kicked Duff out of the house, and the marriage was annulled about 3 weeks after they got married. Now, what does that have to do with Kennedy story? Well, really, the next thing that happens to William Duff is that he's tapping on the front door of General Edwin Walker. So this is probably around, I would say it's probably late November, early December 1962. And Walker is living in Dallas at the time. He's living on a big house on Turtle Creek Boulevard. So Duff's chapping the front door. One of the Walker volunteers answers the door, and Duff asks if he can speak to the general. Walker comes to the door, and basically Duff tries to get a job, basically asks if he can have a job working for General Walker. And he must have used that gift of the gab, as we call it over here again, because he actually, Walker did employ him almost there and then. He wasn't paid for any of the work, but he was given like room and board at Walker's house, and he basically just did some odd jobs, maybe some cooking, cleaning, driving Walker around, just little odd jobs, and in return for that, Walker would give him room and board. Now, around about March 1963, Walker went out on a speaking tour called I think they called it Operation Midnight Ride, and Walker was out the house for around about 6 weeks with a right-wing preacher, evangelical preacher called Billy Hargis, and they went round certain towns, just preaching their politics, etc. And in the time that Walker was away, Duff had some conflict with some of the other employees or volunteers that worked in the Walker house. And basically, Duff's bag was packed, kind of early March 1963, Duff's bag was packed, and he was basically kicked out the house. Now, we get to April the 10th, 1963, and that's when Walker's back from the speaking tour. And many of the people maybe listening to this podcast will know that on that evening of April 10, that was when there was an assassination attempt on General Walker. And one of the early suspects, and if not only suspect, and at that time was actually William Duff. To such an extent that Duff was arrested about a week later. He was mugshot. He took a mugshot. He was fingerprinted, questioned, and then released. But he was an early suspect in the shooting or the shooting attempt at General Walker. So he was basically an early suspect in the Walker shooting incident. Uh, Basically, General Walker hired a couple of detectives from Oklahoma City, and they came down to Dallas, and they basically tried to befriend William Duff, and they set up this kind of mock assassination attempt that was going to take place on June the 10th, 1963. They basically wanted to find out what Duff knew about the Walker shooting, whether Duff was involved, whether he knew who was involved. So basically, that's how Duff gets connected into the story of JFK. I can get into it in a little bit more detail Eventually, it's determined that the detectives and the Dallas police don't think that Duff had any involvement in the attempt on Walker. But that wasn't the end of the story for Duff, because in December 1963, there was a witness who came forward, a man that owned a restaurant, and he said that he saw William Duff, and he knew Duff quite well because Duff frequented the restaurant quite a lot. And he said that he saw Duff in the restaurant about 7 or 8 months earlier. So that would take you into like April, May 1963. He saw Duff in the company of Lee Harvey Oswald, and that got the FBI and the Secret Service interested, and they started to pursue Duff again.
Now, let's examine the Walker shooting. Now, there was a witness to the Walker shooting, was a boy, a child, a young child.
Yeah, I think he was like a teenager, maybe 12 or 13 years old, thereabouts. Uh, the story was, I think his name's Walter Kirk Coleman. And the story about Coleman is that on the night of the Walker shooting, about 9 p.m., this happened. He was in the back room of his house, and he heard, I think he thought it was like a firecracker or something of that nature. But he heard a sound around about 9 o'clock, and he rushed out the house into the back garden. There was a bike that was leaning up against a fence, and Coleman jumped up on top of that bike. Now, this is only a matter of seconds after the shot had been fired, and Coleman saw two men leaving the scene. He saw them coming from the back of the alley. They were running towards two separate cars. Uh, one of the men got into the driver's side. I believe the engine was still running. Got into the car. Actually had a look at Coleman. According to one of Coleman's accounts, this person turned round and looked at him, and then drove off down the lane that goes down. It's not the same lane where the shot came, but a lane that takes you down onto Turtle Creek Boulevard, and then drove off. The other man went into a separate car. My understanding is that Coleman didn't actually see that car drive off. I think by that time he didn't really suspect anything. He just saw two men, leaving the scene, and just went back indoors. It was only later when the police arrived that the significance of what he had witnessed really came to light.
When it comes to Walker being shot at through his window, do you think that he was doing it as like a stage thing? I mean, what's interesting to me is the fact that he shows up at the door with like debris on his shoulder, like didn't bother to scoff it off or anything. And I feel like he dramatized it up. If it actually did happen, someone did try and attack him. The interesting thing to me was like, I didn't think it was Lee Harvey Oswald, because I mean, if he was going to shoot JFK, why shoot at Walker before? Like, they're two completely, what's the motive behind it? You know what I mean? The political ideologies. You got a hardcore right winger like Walker, and then a liberal like Kennedy doesn't make sense. And I found a document from RFK where he wanted the FBI to investigate the Walker shooting to see if this was Lee Harvey Oswald. And they said no, Walker was a liar. So then it's like, what do you do then? It's like there's some things he said that has a little bit of weight to it. I think he wrote a letter to himself saying why Walker is locked up. He was talking like third person. Don't let him see any psychiatrists or anybody with like Russian lobotomies or this type of method of doing. And it was like really weird. And I was like, look, that he might just be nuts, but I mean, MK Ultra was real. They were using brainwashing techniques on people. So he knew about that, whether he was just being a nut job and saying a bunch of stuff in the air. But, that was his own letter. Don't let any psychiatrists see Walker while he's locked up in jail. So there's a lot of questionable things.
Well, there are. I mean, they say that the Tippit shooting, that they sometimes call that the Rosetta Stone of the Kennedy assassination. That you solve the Tippit shooting, you might solve the Kennedy assassination. You could say the same about the Walker shooting, because Oswald wasn't a suspect in the Walker shooting until after he had conveniently been killed himself. And I mean, I've never ruled out, Robbie, that the Walker shooting was a staged incident. I mean, Walker had just come back from the speaking tour that I'd spoken about. So, publicity for him, you know, you know, any publicity is good publicity, possibly. He's just come back from the speaking tour. A couple of days after his return, somebody's had a pot shot at him and tried to assassinate him. That gets him into the papers, that gets his message out. So I've never ruled out that is a possibility. That the whole thing was staged. I mean, another little kind of story around the Walker shooting was Walker's kind of business associate, Robert Surrey. I don't know if that's a name that rings a bell, but Robert Surrey actually was the man behind the wanted for treason leaflets that were handed out Dallas in the days leading up to the JFK's visit. But I mean, Robert Surrey's another kind of person that you almost a bit like William Duff. You have to take a lot of what they say with a pinch of salt. But Surrey tells a story, and he told it to the police, and he reiterated it when he was being interviewed, I'm sure by the Warren Commission, that 2 days before the actual assassination attempt on General Walker, Robert Surrey was driving past the Walker house, and he saw two men uh, basically casing the house. They were they were next to a car, and then they were looking around the house, basically pretty suspicious, looking in windows. Uh, you know, I don't think they were trying to buy the house. There was something going on, and Surrey followed these two men, but he lost them. I think they drove downtown, and he kind of lost them. There was no license plate on the car. He said he was trying to find out if he could identify the license plate, which he wasn't able to. But he testifies that he saw two men round about 9 o'clock, the same time of the shooting 2 days later, casing the Walker premises. Now, it's not unreasonable to speculate that that could have been the same two men that came back, the next 2 nights later. It could have had nothing to do with it. But it's quite interesting that those two men were there, and then 2 nights later, Coleman sees two men fleeing the scene. I could be putting two and two together and coming up with five. I do think it's interesting.
I think especially if you look at like the one for treason posters, I mean, they weren't very happy about Kennedy coming to Dallas. And I think General Walker, instead of taking his pension or whatever he wanted when he left the military, he refused it. So that's like very strange of Walker to do that. And I think Walker going on his press tour, I mean, there's plenty of news clippings I've seen of him like sparking up like riots or potential riots of like 6,000 something people. I think that's eventually why he got arrested. But the weird thing is when Lee Harvey Oswald was named in the papers for killing Kennedy is when he starts making claims that, oh, that was the same person that tried to kill me. And that's when RFK found out that it was, you need to do a thorough investigation of this because I think this guy's using it for political things. He's trying to use that as leverage to be like, hey, if he took a shot at Kennedy, he took a shot at me too. That means, me and Kennedy must be like the same guy, which is not true. But it was interesting to me to look through documentation from the FBI just calling Walker out as like a liar. So I think Walker said some interesting stuff. I don't think he might have staged his own shooting because it wouldn't make sense. He would just shoot through the window and then sit in the chair or pick up, rubble on his. So that could be true. The ballistic evidence is what freaks me out. Is it the fact that like the ballistic evidence, though, stuff that they poured out of the wall? Did you look into that at all?
A little bit. I mean, I wouldn't say I'm an expert on that, but certainly I'm sure that Dallas police, they picked up the mangled bullet on the night of the shooting, and they described it as steel jacketed. I think it was also an early news report said it was from I'm not an expert on rifles either, but it was a 30.06 caliber bullet. So and I think Walker at some point later on said that the bullet that was in evidence wasn't the same bullet that he said he saw on the night that the mango bullet was retrieved. So I know that the authorities have tried to make a claim that the bullet was of the same type that could have been used in the Manley Carcano rifle, but I think there's plenty of evidence to the contrary on that, particularly the fact that the Dallas police said it was steel jacketed and of a different caliber.
So when it comes to William Duff, so William Duff could possibly have been one of the people that could have shot at General Walker.
Well, I mean, another reason why probably I mean, if I had to put money on it, I would say it wasn't staged. I mean, I haven't ruled that out. Is because of the fact that Walker hired these two private detectives to find out if what Duff knew about the shooting, and I'm not sure Walker would have done that had he staged his own assassination attempt. That he would have hired two private investigators to find out who was behind the shooting.
I think there's more
Uh,
evidence to show he tried to like play it up a little bit, like put rubble on his shirt, and open up the door and be like, "Hey, by the way, look, the bullet went right over my shoulder. You can see by my shirt having rubble on it." That's what I meant by staged. I don't mean like he hired people to take a shot through his window at him while he was sitting there.
all right,
Um,
but there are some people who do think that is a
there's
possibility.
people that think Jack Ruby didn't kill Lee Harvey Oswald. I don't fucking know that one either. That was that's a little bit out there for me.
I think Walker also thought that it was Ruby and Oswald that had tried to take the shot at him. So it's one of these things where what do you believe, you know? But there are certainly people who think that Walker staged it for publicity. As I said there, I'm probably of the view that I don't support that because of the evidence of the two men leaving the scene and Walker hiring investigators to look into William Duff and whether he had any involvement. I'm not sure Walker would do that if he actually knew that it was staged. It's also interesting. I mean, the actual shot itself was only about 100 feet. I mean, Walker was lit up in his back room like a firework. I mean, you wonder how the whoever took the shot was able to miss. Particularly if Oswald's been, we're always told that Oswald was a crack shot. He was able to hit Kennedy, a moving target from about twice the distance, moving away from him. Yet he was unable to hit Walker, who was a stationary target, uh, less than 100 feet away, and it was lit up like a firework. It's very strange how he was not able to make that shot.
What I've heard from Posner was that it was like a reflection in the mirror that made it seem like he was actually lower than he actually was, or higher than he actually was. And I just go, I don't know, man. It's like the magic bullet trying to put one bullet making, going through two people and making 7 wounds is a little bit like doing mental gymnastics. But I mean, with Oswald, if you get like a target sitting still, can't hit, it just doesn't make sense. And then if you fit the description of a lonely loner, or whatever they called him, got two people at the Walker shooting that so that's not, unless he's hanging out with Ruby, which I've heard people speculate that he was hanging out with Ruby, but he just didn't seem like that type. I mean, I could see the hatred towards Walker because I think he supported Marxist views and he didn't like it. And I think at a party he talked about, like, I guess they were just back and forth bantering. This is what I heard from Paul Trejo, was that they were talking about killing Walker or something like that. And I think Marina's testimony later talks about locking him in the bathroom when he tried to kill or threatened to kill Richard Nixon. And even talked about that he went to go take a shot at Walker. So that doesn't sound like Lee Harvey Oswald. It sounds like someone trying to fit a bunch of lies to fit into the official story. I mean, the best evidence we can show is that how many people hated Walker in Dallas, how many people just wanted to scare him. Maybe it was just like a warning shot type deal.
Yeah, I mean, the best evidence we have is the evidence of the witness, Coleman. I mean, at the end of the day, he saw two men literally seconds afterwards leaving the scene in two separate cars. Surrey saw two men a couple of days beforehand. Surrey wasn't able to identify, he hadn't seen these men before, so that would tend to rule out William Duff, who Surrey would have worked with Duff in the Walker house. Uh, and
Did William Duff have any connections with Jack Ruby or anybody like that?
well, when Duff was, and see, Duff had re-enlisted in the army in August 1963. And I think Duff thought his life was just going to, it would just carry on. He's worked for Walker, that's done and dusted. He's went through that really must have been quite a stressful thing for him when he had these two investigators basically trying to entrap him, uh, because they basically what Walker had done with these two detectives is one of them, Cliff Roberts, he moved into the apartment building that Duff was living in and befriended Duff, and they basically had a few drinks and got to know each other. And Roberts brought up the Walker shooting, talked about how Walker should be assassinated, somebody should kill him. And Duff said allegedly, "Well, I would do it if somebody had the money." And Cliff Roberts said, "Well, I know a guy who's actually got the money." So this is where he brought down the other investigator, whose name was Bill Keister, from Oklahoma. Now, actually, Bill Keister had a connection with Jack Ruby. Bill Keister is on record as saying that he used to frequent the Carousel Club and he was familiar with Jack Ruby. So uh, basically, the two detectives and William Duff, they basically are trying to say, well, let's we'll give you $5,000 to assassinate General Walker, and that was the plan. And Duff was going along with it to the extent that they drove around Turtle Creek Boulevard. They were basically planning out getaway, how Duff was going to dispose of the rifle, etc. But of course, the detectives, the investigators knew this was not real, and but they didn't know that Duff didn't think that. So they reported it to the Dallas police and said, "Look, we've got this guy William Duff. We think you should have a look at him." But actually, William Duff got wind. He wasn't maybe as daft as they thought he was, because he then went. In fact, actually, I think it was before Roberts and Keister went to the Dallas police. He went to the Dallas FBI and reported the detectives, because he maybe felt that they were serious. So they were all at kind of Duff sixes and sevens. That basically led to Duff having a lie detector test that he passed. But yeah, sorry, going to Jack Ruby, when Duff was after the restaurant owner who said that he saw Oswald with Duff, the FBI and the Secret Service went looking for William Duff, and he was in the army at the time. He was in, I think it was Fort Sill in Oklahoma, and they interviewed him, and Duff said that he knew nothing about Lee Harvey Oswald. He had nothing to do with the Walker shooting, and he didn't know anything about Jack Ruby. But Duff changed that story a few months later and actually started to tell the authorities that when he worked for Walker in the Walker house between December 62 and March 63, that he did see Jack Ruby uh, enter the Walker house at least once a month during that period. So,
Why though? Why? Why would that's the thing is like, why is a military guy, ex-military guy, respected in some sense? I guess he had a loyal following for some of his people, but hanging out with a strip club owner just seems completely opposite.
yeah, I mean, Duff never really volunteered a reason why Ruby could have been there. He basically said that when Ruby came into the house with other two other men, they went into Walker's living room. They closed the doors. He never heard any of the conversations that took place. So he had no idea what Ruby was doing there. So again, yeah, I mean, I've thought about that myself. Why would General Walker and Jack Ruby be in each other's company? Uh, I mean, a couple of interesting things that I thought about was when uh, the two detectives were investigating Duff. He lived at a place called 5420 Lewis Street, Lewis. And interestingly, he lived in apartment 123. Now, in apartment 125, which must literally be like across the landing or next door, there was a lady, just trying to get her name again. I think it was Ingrid Carter was her name. Now, Ingrid Carter basically lived in the adjoining apartment, and she worked at just checking my notes, that she worked at the Merchant State Bank, and that was Jack Ruby's bank. And Jack Ruby and this lady knew each other because he used to come in cash checks and things like that. He actually passed her a card for the Carousel Club. So it could be 6 degrees of separation. It could have nothing to do with anything. But it's just interesting to me that somebody that knew Jack Ruby lived next door to William Duff. And also, are you familiar with the name Larry Schmidt?
Mm.
No. Larry Schmidt is an interesting guy as well because I believe he served under Walker in Germany, in the army. And when Walker resigned and moved to Dallas, Larry Schmidt later did the same, and he moved to Dallas as well. And he was a very right-wing guy. He was part of the mob around the Adlai Stevenson thing in October '63, where Stevenson was hit over the head with a placard and was heckled in the Dallas Memorial Auditorium. Larry Schmidt was kind of like, he didn't hit him over the head with a placard, obviously, but he was involved in stoking all that up. And Larry Schmidt actually lived at 5417 Lewis Street, which again would have just been next door. So you have these kind of little connections of people on the right, like Schmidt. Uh, when Duff and Roberts and Keister were driving around Turtle Creek Boulevard, plotting this fake assassination attempt on Walker on June the 10th, Walker did refer to people that he knew that used to work, used to be in the army, serving under General Walker. So that's maybe a little more evidence that Duff actually knew Larry Schmidt and that they had some connection with each other, but not been able to take it any further than that. Again, it could be pure chance that they happen to live next door to each other. But it's interesting that everybody's converging on this apartment complex.
Do you think that, like, did Duff have any testimonies or anything that he gave to the Warren Commission? Did anybody bother to interview Duff?
No, Duff wasn't interviewed by the Warren Commission. General Walker obviously was, and General Walker's counsel, Clyde Watts, they were both interviewed, and Duff's name is mentioned. If you look up the Warren Commission testimony, you'll see that Duff is referred to. I mean, basically, they both said that they wouldn't believe anything that Duff said. I mean, he had a reputation as being a bit of a con man, a bit of a ducker and a diver, and somebody was not to be trusted. But I think Walker did say, as far as I can remember, that he actually quite liked Duff. He thought he was an all right guy, probably got on okay with him, and maybe was a little bit disappointed when he got home from the speaking tour and found out that Duff had been kicked out the house. But they never actually interviewed William Duff directly, the Warren Commission.
Did the Dallas police or anybody bother interviewing him?
The the best that we can get is the Secret Service and the FBI had caught up with William Duff from around about January '64 till around June '64, because basically this is when Duff was had enlisted in the army, and they found him once the restaurant owner had spoken about seeing Duff with Lee Oswald, if indeed that was Lee Oswald. They found Duff, and that's where they asked Duff if he knew Lee Oswald, if he'd seen Jack Ruby. He said, "No, I don't know any of these people. I've never met them." Then a couple of months later, he got in touch with the Secret Service agents and said, "Actually, I do have information about Jack Ruby." He never admitted to knowing Lee Harvey Oswald. He never even admitted to knowing Ruby. But that's where he started to say that he saw Ruby entering the Walker House at least once a month between maybe December '62 and March '63. Now, I think the authorities kind of knew, wait a minute, this guy's all over the story here. One minute he's saying he doesn't know, Jack Ruby, that has never seen Jack Ruby. Now he's saying that he saw him at Walker's house. He's trying to understand where is Duff here? And there was a suspicion that Duff was trying to sound important in front of his wife because he had just been married, I think at the end of January 64, and he was divorced in June 64. And I think there was some feeling that perhaps Duff was trying to sound important in his wife's company. Uh, it then turned out that Duff kind of went back on the story again. He gave a description of Jack Ruby. It clearly wasn't Jack Ruby. It just couldn't be Jack Ruby. I mean, we know what Jack Ruby looks like. And this description that Duff gave just didn't sound anything like Jack Ruby. And that again is where there's a feeling that Clyde Watts, who was General Walker's counsel, Duff had got in touch with Clyde Watts and asked him if he could help him out, could he get him a job somewhere to stay, because Duff had just been kicked out of the army again, because he failed to admit that he had been enlisted in the US Air Force. So it was fraudulent enlistment, effectively. So he was kicked out the Air Force in 1959, and then he was kicked out the army in 1964. And Clyde Watts found him a job in Oklahoma, found him somewhere to stay. And that's where Duff started to now kind of recant a little bit on the Ruby story. And maybe that was because Watts had found him a job, found him somewhere to stay. So why will I mix? Why do I want to mix Watts and Walker up with Jack Ruby? So he changes his story a lot.
Did William Duff ever leave Texas at any point from 60 to 64, 65? Did he go to New Orleans at all?
I'm not aware of him going to New Orleans. He kind of, after 1964, around about June 1964, he kind of went off the radar. Uh, the, 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 the next I heard of him appearing was in the early 70s, where he was back in Texas, and he was back getting in touch with General Walker. But General Walker didn't want anything to do with him at that point and just told him, there's no money for you here, there's no work here, there's nowhere for you to stay here, so, just, back off and stay away. I think Duff had said that he'd been working in Alaska. Who knows if that's true or not. And Duff basically died in 1992 in Clark County, which I believe is just near Las Vegas. So he's spent his last bit of time out in Las Vegas. But from 1964 through to when he died, that's a big chunk of time that I need to find out a little bit more about what he was up to.
How did he die?
Again, I don't know. I wish I knew that, Robbie. I've tried to find out. I mean, I've contacted the authorities in Nevada. Apparently, death certificates are not public in that state. So, unlike other states in America, I think where you can quite easily get a copy of a death certificate, I wasn't able to get one. They did point me towards a company that dealt with his funeral, and I've been in touch with them. But again, I'm not really getting any joy at the moment, so I've got no idea how he died. I'm interested in finding out whether it was just natural causes or whether there was something, more sinister involved.
Well, I mean, the mob is heavily influenced in Las Vegas, so I mean, unless he got in gambling debt and someone took care of him or something, but
Yeah, I mean, you kind of, when you find out that he's in Clark County and he's near Las Vegas, it does get you thinking about was he in a lot of gambling debt? Did he work in the casinos? Was there any kind of mob involvement? I mean, I'm not sure how much the mob are still involved in Vegas in the early 90s, but it's certainly interesting how he ends up there. Uh, and but it's more research I need to do. I need to try and find out the cause of death. And
did you ever think it was suspicious that he passed his polygraph test?
a little bit, because he
He lied a
he
lot.
base yeah, he did lie a lot, and somebody that lies a lot you would imagine they might have the capability of, you know, passing a polygraph test. This was in June 63, I think, when he had the polygraph test. He was asked 6 questions. I think I've got the.
There is a
I think I've,
phone call with Hoover and Johnson that you can find on YouTube, and it's about Jack Ruby wanting to take a polygraph test. And Hoover said, Johnson says, "Do you trust it?" And Hoover says, "I don't trust those things a damn bit." And then he goes into explaining why the polygraph test you just can't trust it. And I go, that wasn't proven until 2014. It's no longer admissible in court. The Innocence Project has gotten wrongly convicted people that have been sent to jail on polygraph tests out of prison because you can't use that in court anymore. So I go, they knew about that in 63. How many people were they able to send away because they said, oh, he failed a polygraph test? And that's really, I mean, it's a little bit more sinister, but it kind of brings in a whole example. Like, imagine if he was telling the truth and, or saying something that they thought didn't mean anything, and then they just gave him a pass. I mean, what was the 6 questions?
well, I've found a document. The 6 questions: do you have a grudge with General Walker? And he answered no. Did you shoot at General Walker? The answer was no. Do you remember who you were with the night General Walker was shot at? Again, no. Have you given information to anyone about the activity of General Walker or the layout of the house, except the 2 men from Oklahoma? That would be those 2 detectives. The answer was no. Have you owned or had in your possession a high-powered rifle since you have been in Dallas? Again, no. And do you know who shot at General Walker? And the answer was no. Now, basically, it, the person who did the test, the third question, do you remember who you were with the night General Walker was shot at? They say that, let me just find the bit there. Mr. Duff was truthful on all the above questions except question number 3. Due to a lapse of time between the offence and the examination, this person seemed puzzled over this question, which could have caused the indication of deception. So that was the only question in terms of the answer where they thought, there's maybe something to that. Do you remember who you were with the night General Walker was shot at? And the answer he said is no. But they're putting that down to the passage of time. There's not that much time had passed. I mean, you were only talking about a couple of months. So he thought Duff might have remembered. Yeah. In fact, he did tell General Walker that he was working for a trucking company, and I think he said he might have been in Arizona at the time. So he remembered that much. So yeah, I mean, could Duff hoodwink a lie detector test? Very possibly he could.
Do you think that they should have pressured more with the questions? Kind of seems like they were asking questions hoping he'd say a little bit more, and he was just giving quick responses.
Is it not? I think usually in a lie detector test, they usually just ask you to answer yes or no. But I mean, 6 questions. I mean, it did. I mean, you could have had that test over in like 2 minutes. I thought they could have had used that as an opportunity to question him a little bit more because, I mean, I doubt very much, Robbie, that Duff was behind the shot at General Walker. I'm not here to kind of run the guy down. I'm kind of interested in his story because he's somebody that lives not or was born not that far from me. Uh, and I'm just following the different leads and telling the story as best I can. So I've got no axe to grind with William Duff. I think it's unlikely that he was involved, but I do think that was an opportunity for the police rather to just ask 6 pretty straightforward questions and then let him go to have found out a bit more about him.
Do you
And they
think
chose the,
I'll say, do you think that he was just like more of those types of people that would call a bluff? Like would say something like when he's talking to the detectives, talking about killing Walker and things of that sort. He's just talking. He's not really wanting to do it. Hence why he told on the detectives at the FBI Dallas headquarters. Um, so he was more. I doubt he had an axe to grind with Walker. It doesn't seem like it, even if they had, a disagreement or something like that and didn't want to talk to each other again. I mean, that's not enough motive for someone to want to go kill somebody unless they're unstable.
yeah. I mean, they offered them $5,000. These detectives or investigators that Walker had hired. and they were of the view that had if Duff could get his hands on the $5,000 and take off with it, and then he would do that. But I think that Duff, my reading between the lines is that Duff knew they were trying to entrap him. I don't think they might have thought that he was serious about going along with this. I think Duff all along knew that there was something suspicious about these guys, just turning up out of the blue, offering them a bunch of cash to shoot General Walker, when Duff would have already known that he had been a suspect about a week afterwards when he had been arrested. So I think possibly Duff was maybe trying to find out what do these guys know about the Walker shooting when they were trying to find out from Duff what do we think he knows about it. Because Duff basically got his retaliation in first. He went to the FBI. It's actually James Hosty reported it to, the infamous James Hosty of the note that is flushed down the toilet. That was the James Hosty that William Duff spoke to say, look, there's a couple of guys that are trying to set me up here for the Walker shooting.
That's interesting. The Hostie's involved in there as well too.
Yeah, you just all these names all just seem to appear, don't they? I mean, there's that James Toasty. We know about him, but I kind of wish we knew more about Walker and what happened that night, because I do feel as if that you can't rule out Oswald was involved, but uh, things like the note, how the note that was written in Russian that was left inside
Yeah,
a
Ruth
book.
Payne's typewriter.
Yeah, I mean that's all very suspicious, because the note uh, was found inside a book that Ruth Payne had taken to the Irving police station. Now, as I understand it, the police had already been round and at the Payne house. They had thoroughly searched the house, and I think they were back at the house. And did Ruth Payne not go grocery shopping and left the police in the house? Well, to search the house while she went grocery shopping. And if my memory serves me right, I'm pretty sure as she was leaving the house, she saw the police leafleting through the books. So it's almost as if they were looking for this note, because she left the house. That's the last thing she saw, was the police looking through the books, trying to find out if there was anything in the pages.
Well, she said some pretty interesting things over the years. There's a sixth floor museum video, and this is what I really hate about people that say like, "How dare you pick on like a helpless old lady or something like that?" And I go, first of all, she's open to accepting interviews if it fits with the official narrative. You can't blame people for wanting to ask questions about the conspiracy side of things. So we can just drop that argument about beating up an old lady because she's more than happy to sign a couple of books and take a few photos. But the sixth floor museum has a video of her, and they ask her when was the last time you saw Marina Oswald, and she said that it was that night when there's like a photograph of Margaret Oswald, Marina, and her, and they're all in the same room in one photo. And Ruth Payne's like sitting on her knees on the floor, and everyone else is on the couch. And I have a couple documents that talk about the Secret Service where when they were guarding Marina, that Ruth Payne showed up to deliver her some things, and Marina refused to see Ruth Payne. So she lied right there in the 6'4" video. And then there's a couple of things like she destroyed all of Oswald's mail. She destroyed a bunch of things, and it was like you just destroyed evidence. Like what do we? And I don't think it needs to be necessarily suspicious. I think it's just like with the Walker thing. You have a bunch of people like there's so many documents that state that Walker's a liar and all this type of stuff. Well, those documents end up flipping to where they go, yeah, it was Oswald that took the shot at Walker. Where I go, yeah, they're just trying to double down on trying to find more evidence to get Lee Harvey Oswald as the guy who's crazy. I mean, look at what they talk about with his medical records, Oswald's medical records, or they said he was dishonorably discharged from the military. No, he left because he had a gunshot wound. That's a lot different than the way they pitched it. They kind of picked the words. They said dishonorably discharged, which makes him seem like he's unstable, that the military didn't want him. It's like, no, he left because he had a bullet wound, apparently. So, like, it's the word picking. And you start to see, like, now there's like, why there's so many researchers. I think I heard you talk about Penn Jones when he states, find one area in the case and research the hell out of it. Well, there's like 80 different thousand things you can research into because there's like just keep tossing everything at the wall until something sticks.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the things that I've been investigating, like William Duff and the article I wrote on the Kennedys and King website about Kirk Newton and David Christensen, they're little bits of a jigsaw. I mean, in a sense, I like the Ken Jones phrase, take an aspect of the case and research the hell out of it, because, but as you say, there are so many different facets to this case, different individuals that could be investigated, different incidents, different groups, different theories. Uh, I do tend to think that they all do have their own little place. They're all part of a jigsaw. It's probably the biggest jigsaw in history, and it'll probably never all be put together. But I think that people out there should, take an interest in particular aspects and do what they can, dig away, find out as much as they can, and see if it links in anywhere else. See if there are any connections. I just find it very odd that the police are going through the books at the Payne house, and then they don't find this note, and then you know the Ruth Payne goes along there the next day or whenever she did, hands them over these books, and inside these books is that note. It's pretty suspicious.
Well, that's
Uh,
with her and her magic garage too, where
well, I know you could anything could appear in that garage. I mean, the thing about the note as well is that some people know this, but it's not widely known, is that I don't have the exact date, but I'm pretty sure it was still April 63. So it was still the month that Walker was shot or shot at. And before Oswald went to New Orleans, is that Oswald did do a Fair Play for Cuba committee demo in downtown Dallas, with a placard and a bit similar to the kind of thing he did in New Orleans. And that would be a very dangerous thing to do in Dallas in 1963, April, May 1963, given that we spoke earlier about how, the political situation in Dallas at the time, to be wandering about handing flyers out or even just publicising, fair play for Cuba, I think would be quite a dangerous thing to do. Now, if Oswald wrote the note, and it is a big if, I think it is a big if, he could equally have been writing the note about that. That could have been something that that was a dangerous thing to do. That could have led to him being arrested, assaulted.
well, he was assaulted in New Orleans.
Yeah, he was. Yeah, I think that was in August '63. He got into a fracas on Canal Street with Carlos Bringuier when he was doing the Fair Play for Cuba committee. But he did a similar thing in Dallas in April '63. It's maybe not as widely known. But because the note it's undated, it doesn't mention General Walker. It doesn't mention any particular incident. It just talks about what Marina should do with money, what money is kept by, where this key is located for a post office box and things like that. It doesn't mention any particular incident as such. So people put two and two together and say, well, that must have been about the Walker shooting. But it could have been about anything. And I'm not ruled out that I'm not convinced Oswald wrote that note. But if he did, it could equally have been about that demonstration he gave in Dallas.
There's a lot of things that just don't make sense. I mean, you look at the fact when they have that one thing where he's handing out leaflets on video. I mean, dude, to me that seems a little bit nuts. Where I'm like, they're taking a video of it, and then he's doing a report on it too. And then I think they labeled him a communist, and then he's sitting there talking about, no, I'm a more of a Marxist. And he's like, what's the difference between communism and Marxism? And he goes into like specifics about it. And I'm like, this guy's like really intelligent. Like he's not like some idiot to get. And there's like so much of it where it's like very simple evidence or things that go against him. Where I'm like, it doesn't seem like the person. If he's very intelligent, I mean, I don't get it. It doesn't make sense. There's a lot of evidence where it's like you don't fucking, take your rifle with you if you take a shot from a building. Like it does, you just leave it on the ground. Like that doesn't make sense. Why would you shoot from your own work? That doesn't make sense. You don't shit where you eat, man.
Exactly. There's a guy I worked with said that to me many, many years ago. It doesn't even follow the case in any way. But when I was talking to him about it, he thought that was mad. He said, "Why would somebody try and shoot the president from his work? It's just crazy." I mean, I've always been of the view, well, not always possibly, but certainly in recent years, that Oswald, all that stuff in New Orleans and the handing out the flyers and the TV interview and stuff like that, that was all a cover. That was him putting out his left-wing bona fides, I feel like. I think the setup was starting at that point. Uh, get him out there publicly, saying that he's a communist
I think it
he's
was to I think it was to lure out Cubans. There's a fake magazine that was created during the 70s on college campuses called the Rational Observer, and it's kind of similar to the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. Those were created on college campuses. There's Fair Play for Vietnam. It's like every major giant tension point. And it was to rule out communists, people that were in college institutions that could be possible, you know, people that would be communists or something like that, that the FBI was trying to keep tabs on. So it makes sense. I mean, Lee Harvey Oswald was in school. I mean, high school. I mean, I think high school. I don't know if he went to college. But the CIA could easily pulled him out of there and then got him into the military, done a bunch of things. But a lot of that stuff doesn't make sense. Why are you hanging out with right wings, but you're speaking about communist philosophies, apparently, and talking about communist ideologies and Castro and all these types of things? And you're talking about it openly. But then you hear other interviews where he's silent when he's at work. He doesn't really talk to anybody. And it's just like, okay, there's two different Oswalds here. There's like 80, it seems like.
Yeah, I think the point is, Robbie, that where I would agree is that whatever the reason for what he was doing in New Orleans, it wasn't it wasn't genuine. He was a genuine Marxist, or he was genuinely supporting the Fair Play for Cuba committee. It was a cover, whether it was to draw out, Castro sympathizers, or whether it was part of some scheme to put him out there as, he's look at this guy, he's a high profile uh, left leaning Castro sympathizer. Uh, he wasn't doing what he was doing there because he genuinely was a left winger. I don't think he was. I think that was something that he'd been told to do. It was part of his operation, if you like, part of his cover.
I
I
believe
mean,
it.
they believe.
I believe what you said.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the guy's. I mean, he's an interesting guy. I mean, he's.
There's
What
too
age was
much
he?
evidence is the thing. There's way too much. Like there's never that detailed of stuff. And then a lot of stuff started coming out a little bit later as well, too. Like, oh, we have this and we have this. And I'm like, I don't know. The who and the why is obviously people spend 60 almost years trying to figure out. And to me, it gets lost. Like I feel like getting the public in on the discussion. I feel like whoever did it, the government has the answers. There's no reason to keep declassified documents still. Like that, I don't know why that's still happening almost 60 years later. Um, Threat of national security, what does that mean? Like, I mean, that could
Yeah.
mean anything.
I mean, I've not had the opportunity to spend as much time as others looking at some of the new release documents, but I've seen some of them, and you wonder, why was that? Why was that held back for 50, 60 years? The one of the ones I saw was to do with a BBC documentary. That document only got released a few weeks ago. I mean, I don't, for the life of me, I don't know why that document they felt the need to keep that buried for so long. But I mean, you know, the whole thing's so tragic. I mean, I think that's maybe going back to the little drama thing I saw, which will not go down in history as one of the great dramas ever because it really wasn't that good. But it certainly got my interest as a young kid. Is it just like the whole injustice of it? Because you've got like the president being assassinated as he was in broad daylight in front of his wife. He had just left her two kids, a few days before. So it's not just the president, it's a father that's being assassinated, a husband, and then you've got Oswald as well. And whatever people think of whether he was involved, whether he wasn't involved, was he part of a plot, etc., etc. He again was a father of two kids, and he was thrown under the bus in a big way. You know, he was totally expendable, and the people who were behind this didn't think twice about, putting a stop to him.
Yeah, it's
So
sad, especially when you watch that Christmas video when he's with his kids, and you're just like, "Damn, why would you do?" Especially he just had a daughter, and I think October 20th, had a daughter. Then a month later, goes and tries to kill the president. I don't know anybody who's a parent that would, right after having two kids, or right after having another kid, a second kid, decide to go do something like that. And kind of that's like a guaranteed you're not going to get out of there alive, or you're not going to, get off with it. You know what I mean?
yeah, I mean, and that's where the people that were behind this, completely ruthless. That is something that they just didn't give a thought to. They just had to had to accomplish whatever the mission was that they had. Uh, and we could spend hours talking about who was behind it. I've kind of, from time to time move around. I mean, for a long time I was kind of the view that I'm still inclined this way in a lot of ways about the CIA and the anti-Castro Cuban community, who were already, had already worked together to assassinate Fidel Castro. I don't think it's unreasonable that elements of that group turned the guns on JFK. But I think you've also got like the military industrial people as well, the Pentagon, who I think have got the muscle to pull something like that off and to cover it up the way that they did. In some ways, the cover up was even more intricate than the actual assassination itself.
Yeah, like you said, we could probably spend hours trying to figure out who or speculate who, why. I mean, I went back and forth, but Scott, you given me enough of your time, man. I really do appreciate the time you gave me to talk on my show. Is there a place where people can find any of your links? If you have a website, a Twitter handle, anything like that?
I would probably just maybe I don't have anything like that, Robbie, but I'm a member of the Dealey Plaza UK group, and I think you've had some people from DP UK on your show. I would refer people to Dealey Plaza UK website on YouTube channel. I mean, my presentation on William Duff, which goes into it in a little bit more detail than we've been able to do, that is on the DP UK YouTube channel. My article on the Kirk Newton incident that we didn't get a chance to talk about, that is on the Kennedys and King website. That's an interesting story just about somebody who, as part of his duties at a US Air Force base, picked up intelligence traffic, if you like, of a plot to kill JFK. This was in October '63, and of course we know what happened about a month later. So that article I would refer people to on the Kennedys and King website that Jim DiEugenio runs. And I'm on Facebook, so yeah, not made it to Twitter yet, but
I'm not gonna link your Facebook in there because you don't want some creepy people following you or adding you. Um, but I'll link the Kennedys and Kings site, and I'll also link the Dealey Plaza UK video. And it's a great video. I watched it. It was had me reach out to you because I was so interested in this William Duff character I hadn't really heard of before. But I appreciate the time, Scott. I'm gonna link your links in the description. It's been a pleasure chatting. Thanks for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank Pod.